Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have an absolutely fantastic exclusive today. A lot of Wolves fans have been concerned about the investment from Fosun. They've recently bought back some shares from P6 Investment, and I thought there's no better person in the world of football finance to ask to come on and looking around to come on and talk about the state of affairs in terms of Wolves at Fosun and where we are. Are they up for a sale? Then esteemed author, podcaster, and university lecturer on football, the state of football finance, co-host of the Football Finance podcast, and that is Kieran Maguire. Thanks ever so much for taking time to join us, Kieran.
Well, thanks very much, Dave. What a splendid welcome. The check's in the post for that. That's probably the nicest thing anybody's ever said about me. You should hear what club owners I get to hear about what they say about me. It's not quite as complimentary.
Well, that's because probably you dig deep to find out information that the fans want to know. And the reason for me asking you on, as I say, is Wolves have recently bought back some shares from Peak 6. Is it Peak 6 or Peak 8? It's Peak 6, is it?
Yeah, Peak 6, yeah.
Peak 6, yeah. They bought them back, I think, for around about 38 million and 8% return. You've been in the news, I think, a little bit talking about this, and Wolves fans have been incredibly stressed in recent times. Fosun bought us back in, I think it was around about 2018 when we were in the Championship. We went on an absolutely dizzy run. They proclaimed when they came in that we were going to win the Premier League, hopefully within 10 years. We're going to be always pushing the Champions League. We did incredibly well under their first few years. A lot of investment in the Championship. We bought the likes of Ruben Neves, who actually came back because he's injured to watch the Wolves game and help us inspire our first win of the season at Southampton at the weekend. We got into the Premier League, 7th place finish, semi-final of the FA Cup, which we were 2-0 up and lost with 11 minutes to go because only Wolves can do that sort of thing because that's what we do. Quarter-final of the Europa League. Raul Jimenez missed his first ever penalty for us that game when we could have gone 1-0 up. Followed up in that season with another 7th place finish. We were pushing Champions League actually when we beat Tottenham Hotspur away. And then the curtain came down for the pandemic. And since then, we seem to have been going backwards and backwards and backwards in terms of like investment into Wolves from our owners, Fosun. And obviously, we've been sort of like, here we are sort of like now in the relegation zone of the Premier League after 11 games, albeit that we've got our first win. I just thought a general overview question. You've probably been watching Wolves very, very closely. And I know you've talked about Wolves on your podcast at various points. How are you feeling at this point after the Fosun have recently bought back those shares? What do you think it means?
Hi, Dave. Well, it could be one of many things. If Fosun are wanting to put Wolves on the market, a prospective buyer wants to buy a clean company, and by a clean company wants ideally to be able to buy all 100%. Now, that's not always feasible if you've got minority shareholders. If we take a look at what's happening at Everton, for example, it looks like the Friedkin Group will be acquiring 94.6% of Everton. All of the remaining Everton shares are split between individual shareholders who have got, might be a couple of hundred, even be a dozen. And that makes things slightly more complicated, but it shouldn't prevent a deal from going through. So I would imagine from Fosun's perspective, given that Peak 6 are a significant minority shareholder, in that they have more than just a couple of shares, they've got a reasonable percentage, that it could be in the interests of all parties. Peak 6 presumably will have made a profit from their point of view on selling the shares. If you're buying a minority stake in a company, what we've seen, Dave, is that since the Chelsea deal a couple of years ago, the general perception of the value of a football club has increased substantially. Because a few years ago, we were seeing Southampton were valued at around about 250. Remember, Newcastle went for just over 300.
Yeah.
I know it's a dirty word, but West Brom, they went for just over 200 and so on. So clubs that were not big six were being valued in that sort of probably 150 to 300 million pound bracket. What we've seen since then is that prices have gone up. Ipswich were valued at 200 million in the Championship at the start of this year.
Right.
It looks like the Palace deal, if that goes through, if John Textor sells his shares, that broadly values Palace at around about 450 to 500 million. So given when Peak Six bought the shares compared to their sale date, they're probably looking at a decent profit. And what that then allows Fosun to do is to quietly, because these things are not broadcast.
No.
To say, if somebody is interested, we can offer you effectively all of Wolverhampton Wanderers, or WW1990 is sort of the parent company is known, and that's attractive to a buyer because you've not got anybody moaning or anybody agitating effectively at shareholder level, and quite a few prospective owners just want the ability to buy 100% of the club. When again, look at history, go back to the Glazers and when they acquired Manchester United, under sort of corporate rules, if you get more than 95%, you can effectively kick out the other shareholders. You can effectively buy them out, and that's sometimes what we see with that. So that could be one reason, or it could be that Fosun have done their sums. Peak Six might have had an option to sell, for all we know. There could be a deal where we buy, and if certain things don't take place, we can force Fosun to buy back the shares at a pre-agreed price. And so that could have been triggered for whatever reason. It could be that Fosun think that Wolves are worth more money than Peak Six think the club's worth, and therefore both parties are happy. Peak Six got what they considered to be a fair return on their investment period, and Fosun still believe that Wolves is worth far more than the money that they've paid to buy the shares back. So it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's business, and the wheels of business sometimes turn in strange ways.
Yeah, I think that sort of covers it. I think what in that article that I read, based on the price, which I think is just over 38 million, that Peak Six have bought it back for about I think it's an 8% stake. That kind of means, I think that you said it's the value in Wolves based on that stake around about 480 million. Is that about right?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, and I think
which is a good is a good price. Again, you think about it from Fosun's point of view. They will have bought Wolves originally in the Championship for probably somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 at max.
That's it. So when Fosun initially invested in Wolves, there was a big directive from the Chinese government, wasn't there? They wanted, there's a lot of investment coming from China, because that was the directive from there to get involved with it. The Chinese Super League they were going to make into almost like what's happening in Saudi Arabia at the moment, and all that. So there's quite a few of the middling clubs actually that were bought by Chinese owners. Fosun are, I think, the only UK-based football club that is now owned by Chinese owners, and a lot of Wolves fans have looked at the change of directive from the government of China on why a lot of these Chinese owners have pulled back and pulled out. How do you think the directive from the government in China has affected Wolves' investment? Because Wolves fans see that they've sort of turned off the tap a little bit, and which is obviously, if you stand still in the Premier League, you tend to go backwards. Yeah,
I can understand that. I mean, certainly that there has been a change of direction as far as the Chinese Communist Party is concerned. Originally, I think the intention was for China to bid for hosting of the World Cup.
Yeah.
And that, I think they were looking for either 2030 or 2034. Now, if they want to host the World Cup, they want China to be successful. It's now been overtaken by India, but it's still the second biggest populated country on the planet. It's only appeared in the World Cup once. I think that was 2002 in Japan and Korea, South Korea. Didn't do particularly well. I think it lost all 3 matches. So the Chinese government is very proud. He wants the people to be proud. So if China is going to host the World Cup, the last thing you want is to do something similar to what Qatar did in the most recent World Cup, by effectively not touch the sides in terms of progress. So therefore, the rationale behind the investment in European football in particular was what we would sometimes refer to as a knowledge exchange. By buying into European clubs, you'd get coaches coming from Europe to coach in China. There would be sort of a greater direction of travel both ways in terms of talent. That would improve the quality of the Chinese players, with a view to, by the time we got to, say, 2030 or 2034, China would be far higher in the FIFA rankings than it is at present. And then I think that the Chinese government said, we're picking up negative vibes from this. Under the one person, under the one child policy, in terms of family life, there were issues because Chinese parents wanted their kids to be successful in business. So the thought of sending them off to do football training 2 or 3 times a week when they should be doing additional studying for academic subjects, that was causing issues. Secondly, the money that was being spent and the wages that were being paid, that didn't go down particularly well with certain sections of Chinese society. If you've got a communist environment and you are paying people record levels of wages, that seems to be inconsistent with the all for one and one for all elements of sort of the communist lifestyle or the communist philosophy. So there was a bit of a U-turn as far as the Chinese government was concerned, and then we started to see sales and divestment of clubs by Chinese owners, and the Chinese government, it's the nature of Chinese society is different to what we have, and if you wanted to earn favour with the government in terms of collaborations, in terms of contracts and so on, it's a good idea to follow the rules. So owners were either told, you're going to find it very difficult to get money out of China because there are very strict currency controls. And it's probably in your best interests if we, the Chinese government, thinks you should sell the club to find a new owner. And the vast majority of transactions were therefore sales on that basis. Now, Fosun is a large company. One presumes that it still has the thumbs up, the broad thumbs up from the Chinese government. At the same time, is Wolverhampton Wanderers a priority to Fosun? The answer is no. The Chinese economy took a big hit during COVID. The level of growth since COVID stopped has fallen, and I think effectively the investment in Wolverhampton Wanderers is not going to be one of the main issues as far as the board of directors of Fosun are concerned. I'll say that's been reflected in, if it's not one of their main issues, then the level of expenditure will be impacted. I mean, I'm looking at the figures here in front of me, and you rightly said the club was promoted in 2018. They spent £111 million in the first season in the Premier League, getting to 7th, 118 the following season, 84. Then in 21-22, we did see a big dip to 31 million, but it bounced back in 22-23. Now these are the figures from the account. So that's what I just follow those. I'm always a bit wary of believing what I read in the press. But in 22-23, Wolverhampton Wanderers bought players for £212 million and an overall net spend of 160. So the club was very much involved in player expansion. I think you might have signed a few duds. And
Fabio Silva comes to mind when I think that stung them 35 million. And obviously, Wolves, I think in that January when Julian Lopetegui came in, they spent quite a lot of money. After Nuno went, I think Bruno Lage had about 100 million. And I've always thought maybe we were quite reliant at the time on George Mendes. And we've got some great players from George Mendes stable. But, we've also had some that's sort of like the Fabio Silva, which was the wonder kid that's out on loan again. It's never quite happened. We've had a few others that have sort of not worked out. And, I think there's a train of thought, well, we spent a lot of money and had little return on those, lost a bit of money, and whether that stung them a little bit as well. So, Kieran, PSR and Wolves documented, obviously not so much this season, but especially last season. Forest, Everton got points deduction. Wolves sold a lot of players, like the likes of Neves, probably around £140 million of players, just to apparently stay under the line. They've sold another 80th worth of talent this year. Max Kilman, Pedro Neto going. They have bought in a few players, but the net spend this year so far is, I think, minus 30 million. Where are Wolves now in terms of PSR regulations? Can fans look forward to potentially having a little bit more blue water freed up to spend a little bit more money on player transfers going forward?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to say that Wolves were not one of the clubs that were on the watch list last summer. That was Chelsea, Leicester, Newcastle, Forest, and Everton. Yeah, I did an article. I wrote an article for Sky Sports because they asked me to investigate the finances of half a dozen clubs in the Premier League. Wolves were not on that list, and it all got a bit sensitive. Sky put it up on their website, and then one of the clubs got really angry about it and made them take it down. And I stand by what I write, and I've got no beef against any club, even Crystal Palace. I
because you're a Brighton fan, right? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a Brighton fan. That's right. Yeah. So there were clubs, and remember we did have that sort of manic week just before the 30th of June, in which there were some unusual transfers taking place. They were not player swaps, but you had the likes of Anderson going from Newcastle to Forest, and then Newcastle signing a goalkeeper for a huge fee, and he's never been on, I think, even on the bench. Very, very weird transfer was taking place during that small period of time, and that was all done because those clubs were in danger of breaching PSR. Wolves weren't on that list. As you said, they'd already made their sales. I think what Wolves do have, and I thought we'd hinted at this earlier, they got it wrong in 22-23. And a gross spend of £212 million on players who it didn't work out for them. And I'll never criticise. Players always do their best, and why it doesn't work out for them at an individual club could be for a myriad of reasons. Could be that they weren't as good as everybody thought they were. Could be differences settling in. They can be homesick. I'm very fortunate in the job that I do. I work until I teach for the Professional Footballers Association, so I get to know footballers as working people. And I think we see them as somebody wearing our shirt, and we judge them on what they do when they're wearing our shirt, whether that's you're a Wolves fan or wherever it happened to be. And ultimately they're the same as you or I. Their dads, their boyfriends, their husbands, their sons, and they've got lives, and they've got complications in those lives which affect them. I know very, very few footballers who don't actually desperately want to play on a Saturday afternoon and who don't put 100% in training. So for some reason, it doesn't work out. Let's face it, you were right. If we'd been given the chance, we'd have been professional footballers. But there's a very good reason. There's a very good reason why we weren't. I've never seen you play, Dave, but I'm assuming that you didn't make it as a pro.
No, sadly, no. I've played a little bit on a Sunday, and I just do a little bit of five-a-side now. Other than that,
exactly. Yeah. And let's be honest, there's not 30,000 people a week wanting to come and watch either of us do five-a-side. and rightly so, rightly so. So Wolves did have a hangover following the 22-23 season. They had significant losses. The club lost £67 million in 22-23. So they started very early in the summer of 2023 to offload players, which impacted upon you last season, and to try to get into a position where they were balancing the books in terms of net spend. Net spends for Wolves have been very high in some years, less so in others. And also sort of reading the mood music coming from Fosun was, I think they take the view that we've lent money to the club in its initial years in the Premier League to try to get the club to make progress. And we now want the club effectively to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. So in terms of the loans, we're talking, looking at the first few seasons, 25 million, 35 million, 40, there have been significant borrowings as far as the club is concerned. But, we're football fans. And when we don't see that being reflected in terms of progress on the pitch, I think the sense amongst some fans is it because the owners aren't willing to put more money in? I think then they have to ask the question, why should owners have to put in money into a club every season? And I absolutely get it as a fan, because that's what a good owner does. You talk to Chelsea fans, they still worship Roman Abramovich, but Chelsea Football Club cost Roman Abramovich £900,000 a week for 19 years. And they worship him for it because he delivered in terms of trophies. Not everybody has that money. And also, I think there is a feeling amongst some owners, well, why should we? If the Premier League is spectacularly successful, clubs should be able to broadly balance the books. And if they're not, then perhaps we're going to cut back on the amount of money that we put in. And the downside of that is that it's such a competitive business. As I think you were saying earlier, you've got to run to stand still. You see that even in things such as stadium expansion. We've got Liverpool have gone from 44,000 to 61,000. You've got Manchester United talking about going from 73,000 to 100,000. City are talking about expanding the Etihad further. Even Arsenal, who have got 60,000 plus stadium, they're now realising that if they want to be competitive, they might have to increase the size of the Emirates. So unless a club is continually spending money, you do get into that cycle of you can fall further and further behind, or you start to compete with a new peer group. And that new peer group is likely to be the 3 clubs that have just been promoted to the Premier League from the Championship the previous season, plus perhaps the clubs who were promoted in the last 2 to 3 seasons as well. And once you get into that cycle, it's a difficult one to get out of unless the owners have a change of heart.
Well, it's sort of interesting you should say that, because you cover off a really good couple of points. And I think this will also lead into a general talk about the state of Premier League clubs and also season tickets. A couple of things that I've taken out of that, right? One, you're a Brighton fan. As a Wolves fan, we often talk about Brighton as a model that Wolves should be following. Brighton have been incredibly successful over the last few years in continually growing, progressing, moving forward, investing, bringing players in, selling, but continuing to move forward. I mean, this last weekend, fantastic comeback win against City. I went down to the Amex the other week when Wolves scored those late couple of goals, and that was, up until that point, was the most joy that we've had in a very, very long time. But Wolves look at Brighton and Wolves fans talk about Brighton as a model where I think the owners are kind of wanting Wolves to be. But you also talk about in that last section about generally about the Premier League and where it's going, and Wolves fans also looking at investment. When Steve Morgan was at Wolves, and before him, Sir Jack Hayward, there was a lot of work that was put into building the infrastructure. Compton, we've also got great training facilities now. Steve Morgan built the new Stan Cullis stand, which is a great stand. And if you go to ever watched Wolves play Brighton at Molineux, which you possibly have, you can see there's a little lip where it stops. And Wolves, you know, they did talk about investing in the stadium and potentially making up to sort of a 50,000 seater stadium. There's plans been drawn up for that, but it's not happened. It didn't even happen during the pandemic when there was no plans there. The Steve Bull stand, which is the one furthest opposite from the media gantry, is, you know, not really great. It's not good for fans. The concourses are small. There doesn't seem to be any investment that's been happening in the actual stadium. You're a Brighton fan. Obviously, you moved. You were nomadic for a little while. You've got the Amex now, which isn't in the city centre. Molineux is. The point that I'm trying to get to is that isn't covered. Is it under PSR? You can invest in infrastructure, can't you? And, you know, you also talked about Fosun, obviously, earlier in terms of that. What are your thoughts about, like, Premier League as a whole? And Wolves fans also this year had, like, on average 17% ticket price increase. And for that, we expect more investment into the match day experience and, you know, going to watch and plans going forward. What's the general consensus you take out of all of that I've just thrown at you? And what is the success of Brighton and what can Wolves take away from it?
Okay, the success at Brighton is down to the owner. Tony Bloom is a genius. I'm a very lucky guy. I work at university. I work with these super smart professors. I work with all these academics who are world leaders in their field. So I'm used to dealing, and I'm not one of them, by the way. You know, I'm not being unduly modest. I'm street smart.
Yeah.
What I'm good at is explaining complicated things and making them sound a bit more understandable. Yeah, I'm a teacher rather than what we call a professor style academic. I've been in Tony Bloom's company on one occasion in my life, and I realised I was in the company of a genius. He is so far ahead. He is thinking in a different way, and he's used his skills to identify talent. So what you need to be successful, you need a visionary owner and you need a chief executive who has the skills to deliver the aims of the owner. And Brighton have got that. Paul Barbu's the Brighton chief executive. He's probably the second or third highest paid chief executive in the Premier League, even though Brighton are one of the smaller clubs. And why is that? It's because he's held in very high regard within the industry. He's got a fantastic working relationship with Tony Bloom and he's delivering that vision. So the secret to Brighton's success is that Tony Bloom runs a company called Star Lizard. It's a consultancy company. And what it does is it identifies gaps in markets. Now, in particular, it's gaps in the gambling market. And it's through, sorry about the squeaky noise in the background. It's my dog, by the way, if you can hear that. He's got a squeaky armadillo, which he loves, but it can be a bit distracting. So Star Lizard, as this company, it identifies talent, and Brighton has used Star Lizard's services. Nobody had heard of Moises Caicedo. Nobody had heard of Enciso, some of the other players that they've recruited. And it allowed Brighton to go into geographical markets. Because if you take South America, everybody says, oh, well, South America is Argentina and Brazil. So Brighton are trying to sign a player from Argentina or Brazil. They're up against Manchester United and Liverpool and other clubs. And if you're a player, who are you going to go to? If you go to Paraguay, if you go to Ecuador, if you go to some of the smaller markets as far as South America is concerned, Manchester United don't want to go to Ecuador because why? Yeah, they're Manchester United. They can make signings from elsewhere. And on the basis of that, Brighton have been able to recruit and then sell on. And they've also got the advantage of there's no pressure. Because if you come to a club like Brighton, if you have 3 or 4 games, with the exception of Brighton fans, nobody's going to be talking about it. Whereas if you go to one of the bigger clubs and you have 3 or 4 bad games, you'll get you'll immediately have TalkSport and Twitter and everybody going berserk. So it's actually, the club has now got a reputation as a staging post for somewhere on your career. Come to Brighton, get seen in the Premier League, and then go to a bigger club. And I think that the Wolves were in that position probably a few years ago. You have made some absolutely brilliant signings. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But you only need, as you're finding out yourself, and this could happen to Brighton next year, you only need 3 windows where the signings you thought you were making don't materialise, and things can start to go wrong. So yeah, we're riding the crest of a wave at present, but
it's consistent though. It's been very consistent over a long period, hasn't it? They've been getting it right.
Yeah, you say that. I can assure you, Dave, the first 2 seasons in the Premier League, it was painful to watch. I mean, the culture of the club was, let's have a squad which will grind out points, and that's what we did under Chris Hughton.
Yeah.
And then they decided that if you take such an approach, the highest position you could expect to ever achieve in the Premier League was probably 15th. Yeah. So there was a decision made effectively at the top. Chris had to go, brought in a completely different style of coach. And what they've now decided is this is how Brighton Hove Albion play football. And we don't care who the coach is. We will find a coach who will fit in with the style of play. So they went from Potter to De Zerbi, and they went from De Zerbi to Hertzler, and still getting really good results. So one of the traditional problems that you have when you recruit a new manager is that they will come to a club, and first of all, they're the manager. Okay, Brighton's not managers, Brighton's coaches. And your job is to coach the players that are recruited by the club. Yes, you will have some input, but you won't have as much input as you do at other clubs. Yeah. And when you join the club, you have to accept that the reason why De Zerbi was out in his ear last year is that he wanted to sign players, and the club said that ain't going to happen. So on the basis of that, the club has been successful, and I can assure you, the first couple of years, our record signings, Ali Yahanbach, ever heard of him? No. Jurgen Lakadia, never heard of him? No. There's a reason for that, because they both were both disappointed, but we'd paying 14-16 million pounds, which is huge by our standards. So we didn't get it spectacularly right to begin with, and we still don't get it wrong 100% of the time. But what Brighton are good at doing, they'll get it right 7 times out of 10, whereas other clubs are getting it right 4 or 5 times out of 10 because they do the extra research work. They do an awful lot of background checking into players as well. They very much got a no idiots recruitment policy. The amount of interviews they will do with people surrounding a potential recruit to make sure that they're not a disruption, that they will settle in, is unusually high by Premier League standards, and they've reaped the rewards. McAllister's gone on to Liverpool. Everybody in Liverpool says, not that he's a fantastic player, and he's a fantastic player, but what a thoroughly nice young man he is. And he's one of the nicest kids around.
You know what? And I think that's really important. I mean, Wolves, I think, have been quite good in that thing, that they do a lot of background checks. We do tend to have some really lovely players that are playing for the club and say all the right things. Okay, Matheus Nunes dumped tools to get to move to Manchester City. Other than that, though, generally the players have been really sort of embracing the city of Wolverhampton and the fans. We've got like Mateus Cunha, he's a Brazilian, loves it here. You know, a lot of the Portuguese players that we've had have really enjoyed coming to Wolves. But from a Wolves fans' point of view, we feel like a lot of the fans feel like that Fosun have lost interest, they don't care, and they're not spending any money on improving the stadium. That they've made mistake, they've turned the tap off. Is that a myth? Or is that just because Wolves have gone back? Because obviously we're in a bad position this year. Okay, we got our first win of the season, but there's a lot of discontent around Wolves over the last. Lopetegui, when he was here, he came in, he got given a lot of money in January, he kept us up. He walked out on us just before the start of the season, went public, went off on his own and did his own little interviews with Balegi, for example, said a lot of things about the owners. It caused quite a lot of divide amongst the fan base. And then obviously Gary O'Neill's come in, did a great job. A lot of injuries at the end of last season, really poor start. The fans are discontented. The season tickets went up by an average of 17%. And, there's a real angry backlash from all fan groups, about that. In the end, there was meetings. They did wind back on the under 14 increase. They have said that they're going to freeze season tickets for next year, but they say that they're benchmarking themselves along the likes of similar sort of clubs. And I know it's something that you mentioned in our conversation that you wanted to touch a little bit on the general thing on season ticket prices across the whole of the Premier League and overseas fans, and where Wolves are in that sort of bracket in terms of comparable to the rest of the Premier League.
Yeah, if you take a look at Premier League football during the teenies decade, during that period 2010 to 2019, the amount of money that the Premier League was generating from broadcasting went far beyond anybody's expectations. They got a 70% pay rise in 2014. They got a 70% pay rise in 2017. And that meant that clubs were generating so much money that they didn't need to increase ticket prices. But what we've seen as far as the last 2 or 3 TV deals is that increase in money from broadcasting has stopped. It flatlined in 2020. The Premier League will getting no more money from Sky and TNT in 2029 than they were in 2017. And on a per match basis, it's actually substantially less because they've had to sell more matches effectively to get the same amount of money. So if you've got no more money coming in from TV, and to be fair, the overseas TV deals are still improving, but they're starting to taper down as well. Then the clubs will say, well, we've got commercial income and you've got the gambling ban on the front of shirts coming in 2026, 27. You've got an awful lot of gambling companies who your front of shirt sponsor, the chances are they don't care whether it's Wolves or Bournemouth or Palace or Fulham. They just want Premier League club where their brand's going to be shown. So there's no loyalty from the sponsors themselves, so they're probably only signing 1 or 2 year deals.
Well, W888, for example, they've been on something like 4 shirts. They've sort of gone around, haven't they? They've been dating lots of clubs.
That's right. And I had a long chat with the Premier League chief executive. Said, why are they doing this? He says, well, what they do is that they lowball us. That they'll effectively, you'll get an offer of, and they say, we'll offer you 6 million, and the club's saying, well, we're looking for 8. And they go, well, okay, sod you. We'll go to West Brom, we'll go to Palace, we'll go to Bournemouth. And they will effectively go around the different clubs and they will try to get the lowest price. And say there's no loyalty from the sponsor to the football club itself. So that's not good. I think building a long-term relationship with a sponsor can benefit you. So sponsorship money is okay, but it's not increasing significantly. You've got broadcast money, which is not going up to the same extent as well. So the third arm of a football club's revenue comes from ticket sales. And during that decade, as I mentioned to you, the clubs didn't need to put up prices. What the clubs are now doing is they're trying to find excuses to put up prices because they're all losing money. The only club that made money in 2023 in terms of making a profit in the Premier League was West Ham, and that's purely because they've got a subsidised stadium. If they were paying the full rent on their stadium, they'd have lost money as well. So the owners are saying, what we're going to do, we're going to use PSR as an excuse to try to justify these ticket prices, and we're also going to take account of the fact that for many clubs, and I don't count Wolves in this, and I don't really count Brighton in this, or many clubs of what you might say our stature. So we're sort of the middle class of the Premier League in terms of being there a few years and so on. We've not got we've got a big local fan base. Why do you support Wolves, Dave?
Born and bred in Wolverhampton.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I was brought up in Brighton. Started sport. I moved. I remember I moved there from Chelmsford. I used to go and watch Chelmsford when I was a small kid. I moved to Brighton in 1973. They were in the league, third division at the time. Local club, you go and support. There are many people that choose to support a football club, and I'm not going to slag off what you might call the celebrity fan endorsement, the tourist fan, but there are clubs, as you know, some of the London clubs, Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, those clubs have got global followings, and you've got people travelling from all over the world wanting to come and see them. And if you are watching Spurs, or if you are watching Manchester United and you've travelled from the Philippines, or you've travelled from Norway, if you've travelled from Ireland, wherever it's going to be, it's cost you an absolute fortune to get there. You're going to be spending 2 or 3 nights in a hotel in that city. So actually, the price of the match day ticket compared to the overall cost of that trip is quite small. So I think I sent you a table a bit earlier because I'm a bit of a spreadsheet nerd.
Yes, you did.
And
which I'll put on the screen we'll put on the screen.
So as we can see, Wolves had the 4th lowest match day revenue per fan in 22-23.
22-23 season.
22-23 season. So that's before these increases have come up.
Yeah. Only West Ham, Everton and Forest were lower.
That's right. And Forest, remember, it was their first season in the Premier League that season. So they were getting used to life in the Premier League. If you take a look at Everton, well, Everton have kept their prices down because they're moving to a new stadium.
Yeah.
So they're lower. Why is West Ham lower? Because, again, West Ham moved from Upton Park, an Upton Park a capacity of, 35,000? To a new stadium with a capacity of 62. And part of the deal, the way that it was sold to fans, is that you will have competitively priced tickets. So you look at the 3 clubs before you, and there's sort of very intricate and nuanced reasons as to why they are slightly below. And let's be honest, there's not a lot of difference between you, Everton, and West Ham. We're talking less than £1 difference. So what Fosun want to do is that, on average, and this average covers a lot. You've got kids who are getting lower prices. You've got concessions. If you work out what your season ticket costs,
basically a ballpark figure, bringing all the different
that's right
together. Yeah.
So I absolutely understand an individual fan say, well, I'm paying more than that, or I'm paying less than that. The whole point about an average is looking at the things as a whole. So it's bringing in £26.22. Now, what they want to do is they want to move somewhere closer to the likes of, perhaps Bournemouth and Leicester and Fulham. So, they're at £30, Fulham's at 35, Newcastle's at 38, Brentford and Brighton are 38 to 40. And on a percentage basis, if you go from £26 to 35, you're talking about a 30-35% increase. So the fans, Fosun will have seen these figures. And not
this
from me.
This is what they're kind of saying, that we've looked at where we should be with other clubs. And as I say, the average price increase, I think, for this season, which is why there was so much anger, was about 17%. So you're basically saying that that's because of the broadcasting deals. This is why they're trying to jump it up to be in line with those others that we can see that we could see on the screen, is where they're at, where they're trying to get to.
So that's their position. Now, I'm not saying that their position is right, because every town and city in the country has a different demographic. I've been to Molineux on many an occasion. First time I went was 81, a Tuesday night match. I think that was the old First Division, the old equivalent. I think there's no more than probably about 12,000 on there. And I remember
only a couple of years after or the year after we just won the League Cup.
I remember it was I had to sprint to get to the station, not necessarily to catch a train, but we had the misfortune to win 1-0. And I think some of your fellow fans weren't best pleased. Those are there were many great things about following football in the 80s. And it made me a good runner. That was for sure. I'm far too much of a wimp to stand up for myself. But I think that's the position that the clubs. It will have looked at the numbers and said, well, if you want Wolverhampton Wanderers to be a top 10 club in terms of what's happening on the pitch, are you willing to pay top 10 prices to watch the product? But that's ignoring the fact that, my observation of Wolverhampton, first of all, I love going there. I'm not saying it because I'm having this conversation. As an away fan, I love going in the pubs beforehand and just listening to locals talking, and you're given a warm welcome, and people taking a mickey out of you, and you treat people with respect, and they treat you with respect. It's always been my view. So I've always loved going to Wolves on the back of that. Okay, let's be honest. Wolverhampton is not the wealthiest part of the country. You don't have the benefits of being in London. You don't have the benefits of a a big stockbroker belt that you have, and you don't have the benefit of being able to attract the wealthy casual fan who's willing to pay a lot more money for perhaps a 10% or 20% better set of match day experience. And personally, I can't stand going in boxes. I don't like hospitality. You can't wear your shirt, you can't swear, you can't stand up and scream. It's not football for me. But whether we like it or not, football has shifted from what you and I may have grown up with in terms of working class sport for working class lads and lasses to a global part of the entertainment world. If you take a look at the prices for Oasis next summer, if you take a look at the prices to go and watch Taylor Swift, if you go to watch the theatre in London, in the London West End, you will pay eye-watering prices. Football, I think, is still Wolverhampton. I know people say that Brighton's very middle class. It's not. Brighton's got some of the worst, in terms of homelessness and drug abuse. Brighton's one of the worst places to live in the country. It's still got that working class base, for want of a better phrase. And therefore, it's people who have to watch every month what money's coming in and what's going out. You put your price up, your season ticket up by 17%. And the reason why we kick up so much of a fuss is because football is the most important of the unimportant things in life. Yeah, we've all got to feed the family. We've all got to house the family. We've all got to clothe the family. We've all got to go and pay for our transport to get to work and back and get the school, get the kids in the school uniform and get the kids to school.
But but football is one of these things. It's sort of like it brings every demographic and all people, backgrounds, sexualities, everything together because it's our one common thing. Whether it's our chapel or church, or they call it, you go away games, you go thing. It's very important for people, and it's very important for the local economy as well.
It is. So you talk to hospitality. You talk to the publicans around Wolverhampton. We know the 19 most lucrative days of their calendar year. Because that's both home fans and away fans. So that's the challenge for Fosun. Wolves do have one of the lower match day prices compared to the Premier League, rest of the Premier League. How can we increase that? The ways you can increase that is increasing the number of matches, but you're not going to increase the number of teams in the Premier League. So therefore, and you can't be reliant on cup wins or European adventures. That's the equivalent of lottery wins. You can increase the capacity of the stadium, but if you are getting, I use this word only, and I'm not meaning this denigrating at all. If you are only getting £25 per person per match, and you work out the cost of building the stadium, the numbers don't stack up, or you increase the prices.
Can I ask you a question on that one then? Because the stadium is something that does come around, and they did say that they were going to invest and they were looking at bigger stadiums, and it's sort of not happened. They were talking about interest rates and the cost of steel and stuff like that a couple of years ago, and it's gone very, very, very quiet. But you said earlier in this podcast about a number of clubs that are looking or actively looking to increase the stadium. You also look at the new owners of Birmingham City, by the way, who are in League One, who have built land, who are going to build a brand new stadium. Why are so many other teams? I mean, Everton's obviously built the stadium. Tottenham Hotspur recently, probably the best stadium in the Premier League. I love the Tottenham Stadium, how it's been thought out. Why are those clubs looking at investing all that money in increasing or building new facilities, and Wolves seem to have stagnated on it? We had over 31,000 there. We sell out most games. Up until the season increase, he hardly ever went to general sale. They had apparently about 7,500 on the waiting list, although probably a little bit more. Although a lot of those didn't take up the season ticket this year. But there's a lot of fans that do believe that there should be investment in the stadium to improve the facilities, to improve the capacity. Why are some clubs doing that and Wolves not? You're just saying because it just doesn't make financial sense?
Yeah, ultimately, they've done their sums. Spurs know, especially with Son, playing for them, that if they've got an extra 5,000 tickets available, they can sell them to that tourist market. They've also got the benefit of being in London because London's huge. London's got I don't know what part is, 8-9 million. Yeah, London is so huge. So there's lots of local fans. If you are visiting London, and when I yeah, I'm very lucky. I do a lot of traveling. So if I go to Boston, if I go to Chicago, if I go to New York, I will try to see something. And I don't actually care if it's
You
NHL.
are right on that, because when we go and stuff like that, if you're going to New York, you might want to take in a baseball game or something like that. We went to New York, although the men's team we went and watched the Knicks. We went and saw the New York Liberty, which was a great experience in itself as well. So you are right. So if you're coming into London and you're there for a few days, you'll try and get into a game. Whereas Wolverhampton probably isn't a tourist destination, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a sad thing. I know clubs like Reading and Watford. Those clubs are possibly up for sale. One of them is definitely up for sale, and they are marketing themselves as London clubs.
Yeah,
because that way they're trying to attract investors who will also, hopefully, on the back of that, will attract sort of the tourist fan. And I'm not criticising tourist fans, because I'm a tourist fan and you're a tourist fan when we go abroad, and we don't think of ourselves as having anything negative to do with the local economy. Yeah, it brings money in, but you say Wolves is, if you ask a tourist, top 10 places to visit in the UK, Black Country's not on the list, is it?
Probably not. It's probably going to be not on there. Talking about tourist fans and stuff like that, Wolves have got Wang Hee-chan. Tottenham Hotspur have got Son. We see every week now, and they're great, so many South Koreans that are coming over. When we play Tottenham Hotspur, I think the last game, when we went down to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, there was like around about 2,000-3,000 South Koreans. Yeah. And every home match, there does seem to be a lot of South Koreans coming to Wolves, because I think it's a market that Wolves are targeting. But whilst we're talking about, like, obviously they're talking the South American market, and they have brought players in for and South Korea is a hotbed for they love their football, and there's a lot of global fans that will follow the player. For example, Raul Jimenez, when he was at Wolves, we had so many Mexicans, and he's got probably more followers than the clubs. As you see some of them, Ronaldo, Messi, they're their own brand, aren't they? But like, in terms of Wolves have diversified into I think it's described as like a Red Bull model. They've got a music division, they had a fashion division in Shanghai. They're massively into esports. There's lots of Wolves esports teams, and recently, Fosun Sports, in collaboration with Levy Merchandise, and have invested in the Sudo brand. How, in your opinion, I don't know how much you know about this, does esports and a lot of investment into esports and this fashion and Sudo, how does that benefit? Because most of the average Wolves fan don't understand, how does that feed back into Wolves as a club? Because one of the things I've stated, we can't compete with United and Liverpool and all of those clubs on a global fan base, because they've got that global fan base. But we can try and bring revenues in through these other markets, which is what Wolves have been trying to do. But the average fan does not understand how that's going to benefit the team on the pitch.
Well, I mean, to paraphrase Tesco, every little helps. So if you can, I said to you earlier, we've got broadcasting, we've got commercial, and we've got match day. Well, if we can add a fourth arm to our level of income stream, and your income exceeds your costs in respect of those, then potentially that goes into your PSR calculation, that goes into your playing budget as well. We talk about esports being successful. Esports is successful.
It's growing, yeah.
Will you get people willing to pay £25 on a pay, effectively, the equivalent of a pay-per-view basis? No, it won't. So you make your money through the number of streams that you get on YouTube or TikTok or the social map for. But actually, the people that really make the money then are the platforms rather than the broadcasters, rather than the content providers. And yes, I know people that are what I would call big on those social media streams, and they might be making £500,000, £1 million a year. For an individual, absolutely fantastic. Good luck to them. I've got nothing against you whatsoever. If you're Wolverhampton Wanderers and you're a £180 million a year business, an extra £1 million, or even if you get to an extra £5 million, it's better than zero. And every little does help. Is it really going to move the dial? No. So it's better than nothing, and it's good that the club is trying to innovate. But I think it's an acknowledgement that, to a certain extent, you've hit your ceilings in terms of your traditional revenue streams.
Interesting that is, because it is a big area. Wolves have multiple now teams. Obviously, the Chinese, the Asian market's very big into sport. It is growing. I know that one of the things that I was told at one point, they just give Wolves a little bit of an edge when they're coming to selling sponsorships on the front of shirt, because they can. A lot of clubs can go, well, you're on the front of shirt, but Wolves can go, well, you can be on the front of shirt of this, but you can also be on the front of the shirt of like esports journeys. So it gives them maybe a little edge, or they can get a little extra money. What do you make of the Sudo brand, which is which is a disruptor? What do you know about that at this point?
I mean, the logic about having, for want of a better phrase, an in-house merchandise brand is that the profits aren't leaking elsewhere. If you tie up with Adidas, if you tie up with Nike, Puma, Macron, whoever it's going to be, they're going to want to slice the action. If you've got what we call vertical integration, then potentially there can be more profits made. The downside of that is that, do those organisations have the distribution networks? Do they have the quality control issues? And we've seen with Castor, which has come into the football merchandise market as a disruptor. And we had one of the guys from Castor on my podcast, the Price of Football, and he was absolutely fascinating listen. But at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you've got problems with your Rangers shirts, you've had problems with your Newcastle shirts, you've had problems with your Villa shirts, you've had problems with, there are issues which have not been resolved, whereas Adidas and Nike, and there's lots of things to criticize those companies about in terms of how they produce their goods, but we're not going to go down that particular route. What you see is what you get, and at least the shirt fits, at least the badge is on the right way up, at least they spelt the club name correctly, which I think is the bare minimum that you expect as a fan. So in theory, all the profits can be kept in-house. Whether you're going to make the same level of profits, because is your cost control as good as some of the other brands? That's not certain. Are you able to get into other markets, which other brands can do? Because if you're being made by Nike, then in theory, Nike, Brighton got Nike. Well, Nike can set up a pop-up store in Japan quite easily, and so on.
Interestingly on that, Kieran, which you might find interesting as a bit of backstory, so there's something that we've done quite a bit of research. As I say, it seems like the major shareholders, Chairman Guo, who's the main guy at Fosun, he's a major shareholder. Levy Merchant Catering have moved into merchandising. The main retail guy at Wolves, Vinny Clark, moved over from Wolves to Levy Merchandise. If you go on their website, Levy Merchandise website, you'll see it's branded up a lot of Wolves. Now, Wolves had a different deal with Castor than the likes of Villa and Newcastle, because they were manufacturing the shirt. Wolves, all the pro shirts were made by Castor. All the actual replica shirts were made by Wolves, and they had license to make them and do that thing, so they could pop up. And that's why I think they moved away from the likes of Nike and Adidas, because you just, if you're Wolves, you get one choice of two shirts, and that's it. Whereas we think, so that's kind of, it's interesting, and maybe that's something that we can get you on a future podcast to talk a little bit more about, because it might be something that would be interesting for your show as well. Now, I'm conscious you've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, so I've just got a few questions that I want to run through too that have been sent by some of the fans, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
One question here. In your opinion, how good have Fosun been for Wolves, and how good are they going to be for Wolves going forward compared to other owners?
Without Fosun, I'm not sure you'd have got to the Premier League as quick. I'm not sure you'd have got into Europe. So I think initially they made a positive impact. That level of acceleration that they brought to Wolverhampton Wanderers has not been maintained. And I think that's a contributory factor to where the club is at this precise moment in time.
Fantastic. Oh, yes. This is what would be the financial implication of relegation for Wolves and Fosun?
For Wolves, I think a lot would depend upon the nature of the contracts that you have with players in terms of relegation clauses. You would get, because you've been in the Premier League for a few years, you get 3 years worth of parachute payments. Your TV money would drop from probably around about 110 million this year to 49 million. So you got a £60 million reduction there. your front of shirt deal would drop from 7 to 8 million to you probably knock off a zero in the Championship. Ticket sales, you got more matches. Yeah, that would hold up, but ticket sales is your third biggest revenue stream. So clubs tend to lose money. Now, what you might be able to do is to sell off your best players, either through them wanting to leave or out of necessity. So yeah, there is a step down. We've seen plenty of clubs go down to the Championship. Parachute payments are a double-edged sword. They stop you from going bust in the Championship, and for me, that's the most important thing. Will that give you an advantage? Well, you've just been in the Premier League, so potentially you will have an advantage. But you talk to Stoke fans. Stoke were relegated in 2018. They spent 6 seasons, and they've not even finished in the top half of the Championship in all of those 6 seasons. So it doesn't work for everybody.
You're absolutely right. Someone wants to know, in terms of finances, I'd like to know how many Premier League clubs you think are well run. He said they say, seems to me a lot of clubs, Bournemouth, for example, spend a lot of money, then just get their owners to write off the debts. Is that sustainable, or is that a fair observation?
It's sustainable as long as the owner's willing to do that. So I support Brighton. Our owner's stuck in £500 million into taking Brighton over Albion to where it is. Now he'll get that money back. He could sell the club. I'd say I put Brighton in the same price bracket as Wolves. So you would be able to sell for £500 million. In terms of clubs which are well run financially, Spurs are superbly run financially. For every £1 it costs them to effectively invest in that new stadium, they're getting £4 back in terms of extra revenue. So they've done really well. Liverpool run an amazingly tight ship. Arsenal used to be really tight financially. They've had to loosen things following a few years not in the Champions League. Brentford, well run. West Ham benefit from being subsidised by the taxpayer. But 19 out of 20 clubs, I was saying earlier, 19 out of 20 are losing money on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. I love your answers. So, Kieran, just before we get to the end and we let people know a little bit more about how they can find out more about yourself, one final question, which I think all Wolves fans would be really interested in, just going back to the sort of top of this. Do you think Wolves are for sale or likely to be sold in the next sort of 18 months? Or do you think Fosun are just looking for more investment? Where do you think Fosun are at, in your honest opinion?
Wolverhampton Wanderers do not have a for sale sign on their front lawn. At the same time, I think they've let it be known is that if you come in with a very good offer, we're willing to have a conversation. And I'll be honest, there's an awful lot of football clubs in a similar position. Fosun would not be unhappy if they sold Wolverhampton Wanderers. They've enjoyed the ride, they've enjoyed the experience. It's been an expensive one. They'll probably get their money back and make a wee bit of money from it should they choose to sell. They're in no need to sell, so they're not in a fire sale situation at all. But whilst the club is not actively for sale, it is passively available for offers.
And what sort of price do you think Wolves realistically they should command if someone wants to come in and want to say? I read on that thing you referred to it like, well, they've got rid of the tenant, which I thought was a brilliant analogy. If you just want to explain that, because that was such a good analogy that you used.
If I'm looking to sell my house and I've got somebody living in my spare room, nobody's going to go and buy the house from me. So if I come to an arrangement with my tenant, I effectively P6 say, look, I'll give you a bit of money and you sling your rock. I'm then in a position to get a better offer and more offers for my house. So that's what I mean by the tenant analogy.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant analogy. So what do you think Wolves' value is at this point, honestly? I mean, I know you said because of how much they bought Peak 6 for, back 38 million for 8%, it's about 480. What sort of offer do you think they'd accept if they were Fosun? Just your gut feeling, because I know it's speculative.
If I was them, let's be honest, given the current position in the Premier League, and therefore you work on a percentage base, what's the probability of relegation? And that probability has got to be 50-50 at this stage.
Yeah, I agree.
The club is probably, you might be able to buy a club for 100, a good, what I call a big club in the Championship. It probably would cost you somewhere in the region of 100 to 120. Wolves is a Premier League club. probably worth in the region of 400 to 500 million. So split the difference. If somebody's willing to take on that risk and pay 250, 300 million pounds for the whole thing now, I think that will be a good start point for a negotiation.
So yeah, so basically Wolves stay in the Premier League. They're going to be, for next season, you probably can see Wolves being around about that 400 to 500 million. But if we go down, it could be valuation. It's a massive drop. So if someone comes in with an offer, say, look, we'll take it on now.
Take the risk.
They'd be tempted. Listen, Kieran, thank you so much. You're such a lovely bloke, and you speak in language like a fan, which is absolutely amazing for us all to hear. You have a fantastic podcast, The Price of Football. Just before we finish, if you could just let people know how they could listen to more of that, tell us a bit more about that. You've got a book out as well, and how they can find you on social if they want to follow your social information.
Yeah, I do this podcast with Kevin Day. Kevin used to be a Match of the Day too, Channel 4, Channel 5, in racings, cricket and so on. So he's a comedian and a writer. I love working with him. The show goes out 2-3 times a week. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, the usual suspects. So it's called The Price of Football. I've written a book called The Price of Football. If you're interested in football finances, and I'll be honest, you shouldn't be. You should be a football fan. But if you're interested in any of this type of nonsense, the book has sold ridiculously well. So you can find that from Amazon. I've written a book with Kevin called Unfit and Improper Persons, which is about how he and I take control of a mythical Sunday league team and go through each of the divisions financially till we get to be playing in Europe. Kevin's written all the funny stuff. I've written all the numbers. And on social media, I'm just at Kieran Maguire. I pop up on TalkSport and Sky Sports News and talking about the finances of the game far too often for the good of the game.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, listen, we're going to put all of those details for Kieran and these podcasts, etc., in the description. So please go and check that out. Go and support it. It's a great podcast as well. And if you found this video of value, guys, please smash that like. Please subscribe for obviously more Wolves news. And if you've got any further questions or any comments, put them in the comment section below. And we'll try and, if you want to get Kieran back on at another time to talk a little bit more in the future, that would be absolutely fantastic. Finally, from myself, Kieran, listen, thanks ever so much for coming on. And it really is appreciated. And I'd just like to put out a personal invitation. If you do come to the match at Molineux later on in the year, if you can get up a bit earlier, we can go for a bite to eat before the match.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. And enjoy every match. That's what I always say to people. Win, lose or draw, you're still a Wolves fan at the end of it.
Mate, we've had so much pain up until the weekend. We hadn't won since April, and we hadn't won a Premier League match, a team in the Premier League since March. It'd been 260 days or 7 or 8 months. So the bits of joy that I had, Brighton away, that last fight. Were you at that game?
Of course I was. Yeah. I've got season ticket. I've season ticket with you up years. Yeah.
You were singing "Going Down with the Palace" just before we scored.
I know. I never sing those songs. I've got no time for that type of stuff.
I'll tell you what, the limbs in the away end that day was that really the joy we had. And of course, we got our first win. I'm hoping that we stay up.
Exactly.
And,
absolutely.
I'm looking forward to hosting Brighton and hopefully catching up with you before the game when we play later on the season. But just finally, thanks ever so much for joining us. Check out all of Kieran's information. Go and subscribe to his podcast. And until the next one, guys, from myself, thanks, Kieran. Always Wolves.